Hello and welcome to today's webinar. This is the official A Call to Action, the Economic Opportunity Narrative Change Coalition launch. My name is Olivia Harp and I would like to thank you all for joining us. We'll give people about a minute and a half to join and then we'll officially get started. Okay, and welcome again to our call to action. This is our Economic Opportunity Narrative Change Coalition launch. I want to thank you all for joining us today. You are certainly in for a treat. And so without further ado, we'll get things kicked off for you all. So just a few housekeeping tips. We know that you may not be familiar to the GoToWebinar platform, but this webinar is being recorded. And it will be provided to you all within a week from today and also posted to our YouTube channel. So please be on the lookout for that. You are all muted to ensure sound quality, but please use the questions box on your control panel to leave us comments and questions, reflect on today's content, and just interact with us and the speakers. And if you're experiencing any technical issues, please email us at gotomeeting@prosperitynow.org. Just a few tips for getting the most out of today's webinar. We want to ensure that you join from a quiet place so that you can really settle in and get comfortable and absorb all of the great things that we have for you today. We want you to grab a coffee or a snack, get really cozy. The weather is changing, so feel free to grab those coffees and lattes and warm up. Also engage with us. Again, use the questions panel to send us questions and comments as you listen. We will definitely take time to address those questions towards the end of our presentation, and also reflect on ways to apply what you learned to our work, to your work. Everything that we do here at Prosperity Now, we want it to be applicable and we want it to benefit you all. So as we continue, we want you to keep Prosperity Now's mission in mind. So Prosperity Now's mission is to ensure everyone in our country has a clear path to financial stability, wealth, and prosperity. So let that sink in and simmer and just stay at the forefront of your mind as we continue today's webinar. And we have a lot packed in for today's agenda. So we just completed the welcome and housekeeping, and then we will have the Cambridge Collective and Prosperity Now partnership overview so you can learn a bit more about what's been going on behind the scenes to bring this amazing opportunity to you. We'll talk about false narratives as well as limitations of current economic opportunity narratives. And then we'll also talk about the work ahead and how you can get involved. We're all here to have some collective impact, all work together and really make changes in our economy. And that will all be followed by a Q&A. So again, please continue to submit your questions and comments so that we can interact with you. And then we'll close with next steps and a call to action in the spirit of today's webinar. And so today's speaker will be Mary Frances Wayne. She is our Chief Engagement Officer here at Prosperity Now. You will also hear from Mark Allen. He is the Director of Shared Prosperity Cambridge Collective. And you will also hear from Rebecca Thompson. She's the Vice President for Strategic Partnerships and Network Building here at Prosperity Now. So without further ado, I will pass things along to Mary Frances Wayne. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivia. I am really excited to be with you today and all of you to officially launch this coalition, which, as Olivia noted, has been in the works for some time. Prosperity Now underwent a comprehensive strategic planning process over the last 2 years, the result of which was a focused commitment to work at the systemic level to address racial and ethnic economic inequities, to work on big levers for change and scale that will move the needle to closing the racial wealth divide. We believe we are at an unprecedented moment to do that. We believe some of these levers include right-sizing our tax system, building an ecosystem to advance BIPOC entrepreneurship, and scaling baby bonds nationally. We also believe that one of the most powerful levers is narrative change, that it is essential that narrative change, culture change, and policy change work in alignment to secure lasting societal change. As you know, there are harmful narratives in place, if not entrenched, that reinforce the inequities we all work toward addressing. Many of us have already identified narrative change as an important tool. Some are actively executing narrative change strategies, and we want to hear from you, and others are wondering where to begin, and we want to hear from you too. As a national intermediary organization, Prosperity Now is positioned to connect what is happening on the ground with national decision makers and movement leaders. We see the opportunity to do this with narrative change, and that's why we are so excited about our partnership with Camber Collective. Camber Collective has been conducting research and analysis on the state of economic opportunity narratives and related narrative change work, and has new insights into where there's been success, where there are big challenges, and chief among them being the fractured nature of the current state of these independent initiatives. Together, we recognize there's opportunity to align all work in community on changing harmful narratives on wealth inequity, to share what is working, where traction is being made, and with what audiences and what messages are resonating to advance our collective work. There is not a single right approach, but there is a greater opportunity to align all efforts and learnings, to share information with each other and the broader field in order to build and strengthen our collective power and advance our shared goals. We soft launched this partnership, an invitation to join this effort last month at our Prosperity Summit to a standing room only audience. And we're here today to continue to build on that conversation and our growing alliance with all of you. In the next hour, you'll hear more from Mark Allen on Camber Collective's work to date, as well as from Rebecca Thompson on what this means for the Prosperity Now community and how you can get involved today and in the weeks and months to come. We hope you will add your name to our collective movement and be part of this unprecedented opportunity for economic narrative change. We're looking forward to learning and leading in this work together. And with that, I am pleased to welcome Mark Allen.
Thank you very much, Mary Frances, and good morning and good afternoon to you all. It is incredible to me to have 500 or more organizations responding to our call to join us in expressing interest for this coalition. Thank you for making the time, and thank you for joining us from all corners of the United States. As Mary Frances overviewed, I'm going to spend a little bit of time with you now walking through some of the bases for this coalition, why we think now is an unprecedented opportunity to have impact together. I'll then walk through what we know so far about what some of the prevailing harmful narratives are around economic opportunity in the United States and try and put a bit of structure into that thinking. And then following that, I will guide you through some of the specific limitations that we've seen and heard about in our field consultations with regard to current narrative change efforts and how we plan to tackle that with this new and hopefully impactful coalition. So on the next slide, I will just talk you through a little bit the bases for what we're doing. We think that there is an incredible, really once in a generation opportunity to have a collective impact. And the reasons for that are threefold. On the next slide, you'll see the first reason, which is that we really, even before the big seismic events of COVID-19 and the murder of George Floyd and other awakenings, we were in a unique moment. And on the next slide, you'll see some elements of that. So we noted some research coming out of the Pew Research Institute, as I mentioned, pre-COVID, that indicated that there was a growing awareness among both Democrat-leaning and Republican-leaning voters in the US around the economic inequities that exist, and specifically the increasing disconnect between individual effort and economic reward. And for us, that was eye-opening. This is not a trend that we had really seen proven at scale up until then, and it was very exciting to see that growing awareness that the economic system is just not bearing fruit for a large majority of Americans. We all know that between 30 and 40% of households in the US are just one unexpected $400 bill away from falling into debt, which means one unexpected health bill, one unexpected car repair can really topple the financial planning of a household. And we know that that level of economic precarity is just not tenable. On the next slide, I don't know that I will teach you much, but rather reinforce what we all have been through over the last few years, which is a recognition, a collective awakening that millions in the US face economic injustice, that precarity economically is disproportionately high for certain socioeconomic and demographic groups. And perhaps something that we don't talk much about, but that happened very much over the last 2 years, the falling into poverty of many households across the country as jobs were lost and benefits were slow to be received. And the third pillar, the third and final pillar we'll talk about on the next slide, that makes this an incredible window of opportunity for us, is that we are fortunate to finally have a nascent knowledge base around narrative change on poverty, on economic inequality, on economic opportunity. A number of funders who are present today have funded some seminal efforts to better understand what the prevailing narratives are in the US, where are the myths and misconceptions about the reasons why some individuals, some households, some communities suffer disproportionately poorer economic outcomes than others. We now have an exciting emerging knowledge base on the attitudes and beliefs around economic opportunity, around the segments of the US population that are more inclined to believe certain of those narratives. We also have broad agreement on the founding principles of narrative change, such as the need to center those who are most impacted by harmful and erroneous narratives, and the fundamental need to make sure that any narrative change efforts center anti-racist narrative change, as well as broader changes in narrative on the state of the economy. And finally, we have nascent frameworks and toolkits and playbooks to try to have a go at implementing narrative change initiatives, and we're seeing increasing application of that knowledge base. So for a moment, I just want to thank the funders, the change makers, the researchers who have informed, designed, and applied some of these early narrative change efforts, and say that we have taken a great amount of time to research those in further detail, to compile a good understanding of those, and to think about how we can build on that early field building toolkit to further deepen our aptitude for narrative change and really reach collective impact. We'll move to the next slide. So we're going to take a little pause now, have a little poll, just out of interest to see who is in the room today. As I mentioned, we had close to 600 individuals from about 500 organizations already engaging their interest. We want to take stock of who we have with us, and so there is a poll that I'm hopeful Olivia will make appear for you to complete, for you to convey to us where you are in your narrative change journey. And you may not be on any journey at this time. You may be joining us today because you're interested, you feel galvanized to get involved. Similarly, we know that there are folks in this virtual room who have been at the forefront of narrative change research, development, design, and application. And I will just pause now and give you a moment to complete this poll, and Olivia may reveal the results. Okay, so it looks like we've got a very broad set of stakeholders, which is exactly what we hoped for. I think this coalition is certainly going to be broad enough to bring new people into the fold and new organizations, but also to capitalize on the work that others have been leading already. And so we see a good number, close to 3/4 of you, who have already begun to some degree or other a narrative change effort. And then about 1/4 of you who are a little bit earlier in this narrative change discovery, perhaps finding out what exists, what the toolkits are, and thinking about how you might incorporate narrative change into the work of your organization. So thank you for completing that. I'd like to move on now to tell you briefly a little bit about Canberra Collective. We're a social impact strategy consultancy with 3 offices in the US and about 40 staff globally. We work on big, tricky, systemic, equity-driven social impact challenges with a range of impact organizations, from philanthropies to global organizations, all the way through to direct service nonprofits at the local and regional level. And we bring 3 types of functional expertise, which we hope are going to be very useful to this future coalition. On the one hand, we have a lot of expertise, as Mary Frances said, in attitudinal change and behavioral change research and programs. Secondly, we bring expertise in the strategic alignment and strategic planning processes. And thirdly, we have a lot of experience in designing and managing collective impact coalitions. So we're very excited to hopefully be working with a good number of you over the coming years. I'm going to spend the next few minutes just talking through what the harmful narratives are that we know about from the research that has already been done by others in the field, to try and summarize those back to you. And then we'll talk a little bit about how we plan to tackle those. But on the next slide, you'll see the first of 5 key false narratives that are very prevalent. We'll skip to the next slide, please. And I want to take a moment to call out the Shared Prosperity Catalyst that's spearheaded by Ideas 42, funded by Wells Fargo and others, I believe, whose research has been seminal in this early understanding of what these narratives are. I also recognize there's a number of other organizations who have led incredibly helpful and insightful segmentations, research, and analysis to inform some of these. So what you're going to see in the next few minutes is our synthesis of some of the work of the Shared Prosperity Catalyst, but also incorporating some of the learnings of others into 5 key narratives that this coalition is going to work to dismantle, evolve, and replace. The first false narrative that we know is very prevalent in the US is the narrative that assumes inadequacy on the part of those who are experiencing poverty, economic inequality. This idea that economic marginalization allegedly happens due to individual faults, such as laziness, and poor choices, such as spending on the wrong types of things. On the next slide, you'll see the second false narrative that we're going to try to tackle, which is welfare stigmatization. And this narrative comes to life in attitudes such as the belief that economically unsuccessful people abuse public benefit programs for their own gain, or that public benefit programs in some way disincentivize work too much, or that welfare is simply a waste of taxpayer money. I don't think this narrative will be one that comes as a shock to anyone on this webinar, but it's certainly one that is center for us in working to undo it. On the next slide, you'll see the third false narrative that we're looking to tackle, which is the meritocratic idealism that is still pervasive in much of the coverage of economic outcomes and poverty in the US. This idea that rags to riches stories still show that the US can reward those who work hard, that anyone can achieve the American dream if they put enough effort into it, and that all it really takes is the willpower to pull yourself up by the bootstraps. The fourth of the 5 narratives is on the next slide, and is the narrative of paternalistic mistrust. And this really comes to life when we hear people say that people who live in poverty can't be expected to know what is really best for them or for their families, or the belief that government, nonprofits, and other power holders must in some way guide, supervise, or approve the choices of those individuals and communities that are struggling economically. So very much a condescending, paternalistic attitude that we see very much in the way some government programs are designed, some philanthropic giving is designed, and we want to work to dismantle that. And then the final one of the 5 broad narratives that we're looking to tackle on the next slide is the narrative of fatalistic apathy. This is not so much a judgment of those who are experiencing poverty or poor economic outcomes, but rather a sense that unequal economic outcomes are a structural inevitability, that there is little point in lamenting these because there is no solution anyway, or the belief that nobody has the power to change economic outcomes at scale in any case. So there's no point worrying about it, or no point thinking about what can be done because supposedly nothing can be done. And we believe firmly, both at Prosperity Now and at Canberra Collective, that the current economic outcomes we're seeing of declining economic mobility, of increasing polarization of income and wealth, and increasing racialization of wealth are very much the fruit of choices made by the people who represent us and influence exerted by entities that have more power than us currently. And so we very much want this collective approach so that we can provide a counterweight to that disproportionate power that those stakeholders wield. Right. There are, of course, many more narratives beyond these, but these are the 5 big families that we see as long-standing, pervasive, and very much supported by folks who believe in them and who coordinate their efforts to sustain these narratives. And so these are the ones that we will look to center in our work. We can move on to the next slide now. And just take stock of the impact that these narratives have. Why are we even focusing so much on narrative change? And there are 5 big reasons, again, for driving this work together. One is that these harmful narratives limit how organizations can talk about economic opportunity. There are just certain terms, certain real explanations that explain the current economic outcomes we have that cannot be broached, that cannot be expressed, because too big a portion of the US population will reject them out of hand. Secondly, these harmful narratives impact how government and philanthropies design their funding. They narrow the scope of the potential policy solutions that could expand equitable economic opportunity nationwide. They constrict the evolution of public opinion on economic issues, and they perpetuate marginalizations, racism, and the othering that is so pervasive in the US still and causes such daily harm and hardship to so many. So I want to take a moment now to shift gears and acknowledge, as I mentioned earlier, that there are different levels of understanding in this virtual room and experience around narrative change, and just share some of our learnings from our work surveying the field and listening to the 70 or 80 organizations that attended the soft launch of this coalition at the Prosperity Summit. So if we skip forward 1 slide, and then again, just before we get into that, we will do a quick poll and ask you which category of organization best describes you and your organization. Are you primarily a funder of narrative change? Are you primarily engaged in narrative change efforts in the policy and advocacy space? Are you perhaps leading some of the research and analytics and development that is shaping the way narrative change is done? Perhaps you're a community engagement or direct service provider organization, or you may be in the media and communication space and reporting on economic issues regularly. So we'll take a moment again just to see who we have in the room. I'm going to ask you to complete the poll, and then Olivia will reveal the results in a few moments. Great. So looks like we have a very strong mass of very essential change makers in the community engagement and direct service provider space, which is fantastic. A large mission of this coalition is to bring some of those folks together so that we can get all of the great research and data that we currently have into the hands of more people. We also have a strong policy and advocacy presence, which we were hoping for as well. It's not always easy to tie the bridge between the narrative change research and application in the policy and advocacy space. But great also to see a sizable volume of funders who are potentially interested in supporting this work, researchers and developers, many of whom I know have been instrumental in launching narrative change efforts, and also a good number of media and communications folks who are perhaps in the journalistic space or in some way have communications expertise. So thank you all for being with us. We're going to move on now, and as I mentioned, I'm going to talk through on the next slide the sort of 5 key observations that surfaced for us. And I want to stress that these are observations that have come to us from our work with the field. So before you read any of the appallingly tiny text on this slide, which I will work through in a moment, Canberra Collective was engaged in 2021 by a large philanthropy to better understand the needs of the economic opportunity and economic mobility field, meaning the think tanks, the policy influencers, the direct service providers, also the funders that are excited about economic opportunity and investing in economic opportunity, to understand what do they need to be more effective as a collective. And as a result of that outreach, which involved engaging 150 organizations and conducting some extensive primary and secondary analysis and research, subsequent to that, as I mentioned, we had a session at the Prosperity Summit last month in Atlanta, where 70 or 80 or so organizations filled out our room and gave us a huge number of ideas on the limitations of current narrative change work and what a coalition would need to tackle in order to implement better narrative change efforts around economic opportunity. And so we'll go through these one by one now. On the next slide, I'll start with one of the bigger learnings for us, which was that currently there is a huge fragmentation of narrative change efforts, meaning that there's a sort of piecemeal approach. Folks are absorbing some early learnings here and there and conducting small pilot programs typically, but very much each organization in its corner and not yet much collective action around a collective strategy. And the reason that we know this is so important to address as a field is that the opposition we face is not like this. The opposition we face is coordinated, is consistent, and is delivering the same narratives over and over again from multiple angles to the same audiences in such a way that they really are being reinforced very, unfortunately, very successfully. And so our belief is that this coalition needs to really build in some concerted repetition collectively of new narratives that we deliver consistently, albeit through different channels, in order to change narratives at scale. And that will be one big mission for this coalition. Next slide, please. The second of the 5 observations that we heard from the field was that campaigns currently for narrative change are extremely small scale on average. There are a few larger efforts, but by and large, these are very scattered, very small efforts. And they are almost exclusively bottom-up, which means that they are being developed at community level, which we know is essential. We know that place-based specificity is essential, but we're lacking some of the broader umbrella that allows us to reach more people more efficiently at scale. And our belief is that over time, this coalition will need to build and sustain the bottom-up work that communities are doing, which is invaluable and which we can support, and also bring in a more umbrellaed approach that involves, mass media and some of the scalable activities that are essential to complement what is happening at community level. On the next slide, we'll see the third mission that we have, which is we heard that funding is both very modest, very short term, and sometimes very unrealistic on narrative change, meaning that small envelopes are given to organizations to achieve wildly ambitious goals in very short periods of time, and funding is often withdrawn or not available on a multi-year basis. And so we know that one of the key things that we need to eventually achieve with this coalition is to have a central pot of multi-year funding that Canberra Collective and Prosperity Now can jointly administer, so that we can relieve the endless burden that many organizations feel to find funding, to apply for funding, to find a distinguishing feature about their organization that warrants them receiving the funding over others, and instead to build a centralized pot that we can apportion equitably to all stakeholders around collective projects that everybody can be engaged in. Fourth, on the next slide, we know that there is, as I mentioned earlier, a partial emergence of a knowledge base. We also know that there are many gaps still to be filled, that there is further research and data around the narratives that work, the best messengers to deliver those narratives, and the best audience segments to target with each of those narratives. We know that there is further learning that we need to do on that front, and that we need to then translate for the field into playbooks that are relevant to different types of organizations and sectors. And that will be one big undertaking of our coalition. And then finally, on the next slide, the fifth challenge that we heard is that there are growing efforts to disseminate the learnings of narrative change, to share what works and what doesn't, and as I mentioned, to translate some of those learnings into actionable toolkits. But there's still a great way to go in building that muscle and creating the infrastructure for that knowledge exchange, for that collective learning and continuous improvement. We will try to bring that and to lead that alongside you. And that caps my segment, I believe, of this webinar. We're very excited to work with those of you who choose to engage more deeply over the coming year or years. And I believe I can now hand over to Rebecca from Prosperity Now. Rebecca Thompson, who is the Vice President of Strategic Partnerships and Network Building at Prosperity Now, and has been a key thought partner in getting us to this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone. Now that you've heard about the partnership between Prosperity Now and Canberra Collective and how we're working together to advance narrative change efforts and all of the work that needs to be done, I want to take a few moments to turn our attention to the work that's ahead of us and the steps that we can take to further build on the work we began during the Prosperity Summit, and we will continue until we achieve our desired success. You know, I'm always a fan of anecdotal sayings, and one is the load is lighter when everyone lifts. And we also recognize that centering the people who are most impacted by our efforts, diversity of thought and experience all work together to create sustainable solutions. We can go to the next slide. And so today, we launched the Economic Opportunity Narrative Change Coalition. Through this coalition, we are creating strategy, scale, and enabling infrastructure that are required to drive collective narrative change efforts across 4 channels of impact. We can advance the slide. So workshop participants during the Prosperity Summit helped us to identify a vision for the coalition, which I'll share shortly. And the mission will be co-created among our members. The channels of impact that we are working to address include mass media, pop culture, policy circles, and communities. Now, some of the work that we will need to undertake will include research and development, sharing collective learnings, designing and incubating the campaign, fundraising and fund allocation, impact measurement, and reporting. And of course, everyone is welcome. We do have coalition managers which will be Prosperity Now and Canberra Collective. But we also welcome and need funders, shapers, and change makers as well to participate in this coalition. We can advance the slide. So I mentioned earlier that during the Prosperity Summit, several of the workshop participants actually helped us to flesh out what a mission could be for this, a vision for this coalition. And so we're really looking for widespread recognition of the systemic causes of economic inequality and majority support for structural changes to advance economic opportunity for all. Now, we will work together to co-develop and implement the mission, but that is to include strategies, campaigns, playbooks that are required to establish scale and accurate and equity-centered economic narratives. Next slide, please. So I mentioned earlier the channels of impact that we're looking to address. You see here, mass media, that's online, print, journalism, Hollywood, the TV, anything that you see, radio, news, nonfiction publications, pop culture. Who knows, we might make a TikTok. Social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, TV series that reference harmful narratives that continue to reference harmful narratives. We're looking to impact those. Podcasts, as well as the music industry. Of course, in the policy circles, we really want to change the narratives of our lawmakers and our legislators. Also, think tanks and universities, and then and bipartisan policy groups as well. And in communities, at the community level, I see that the majority of the folks here represent frontline practitioners. So we're looking to impact the faith groups, the local level artists, the community-based organizations, school systems, and your community government as well. So quickly, I want to ask a question. We'll put up another poll, but which of the 4 channels of impact are most interesting to you? Is it the mass media, pop culture, policy circles, or communities? Where would you like to see the greatest impact? And we'll give you just a moment to respond to that question. All right. Hopefully we've had a chance to respond. Okay. And so we see that the majority of the folks here are interested in impacting the community level, the culture at the community level, followed by policy, pop culture, and mass media. Just representative of the group that we have here today. Thank you so much for participating. All right. So I also mentioned some of the functions that we will need to undertake. So as you're thinking about the impact, the channels of impact, think about the position that you would like to hold and what type of function you would like to do. Would you like to do research and development and help us to redefine our understanding of the narratives and what exists and what messages are needed to actually change those narratives? Are you willing to work together to build on our collective knowledge and alignment within the coalition, sharing what you've experienced and what you've learned from your community and from your narrative change efforts, and learning from others what they've experienced in their narrative change efforts? Are you wanting to work and partner with us to help us to design the campaign, to collaborate on the campaign and design the mutually enforcing messages that we need to share and to get out into the sphere, to the atmosphere, to counter these false narratives? Are you interested in helping us to raise funds? Are you a funder who is interested in contributing to this effort? Then definitely we need your help and support to help us to change the narratives. And then finally, we won't know that we're successful unless we measure. And we measure and monitor our impact. And so we also need participants, coalition members who will help us with impact measurement and reporting. Next slide, please. So last poll, I believe, for today is, are you interested in joining us? And this should be a quick and easy yes, no, once we get that poll up. Are you interested in joining us in this effort? All right. All right. So we've got some folks who are definitely interested in joining and some who are interested and would like more information. Awesome. So we will continue to provide you with some more information and a few more next steps. And a couple of folks who may not be so interested, that's okay. Once we get back to the slides, we'll provide you with a little more information and some next steps, and then we'll head into the Q&A. So I'm going to hurry up and get done with my part. All right. Well, we will head directly into the Q&A.
Yes, everyone, and we had some really good questions come in. You all were just reacting to all of the great content that we have from today's speakers. And so now is the time for you to interact with everyone that you've heard from today, to all of the content that you've absorbed. So we're gonna hop into our first question. So this comes from someone in the audience who says, many of these false narratives are echoed by local elected officials. So how will you be working with cities and counties to affect change from the ground up?
I can jump in there if you'd like me to. I think this and Rebecca's going to talk about next steps at the end of the hour. But one of the things that we're planning is a working session in January, so we can take the findings from today and really set our collective agenda and work plans. So we're looking forward to working with the coalition to identify priorities and action plans.
And then I think people are just asking a lot of questions on how to get involved in trying to see their role in this launch. So that's really excited to see. And so we had a few questions actually come in from the chat, but they're asking us to speak to either planned ways or opportunities for them to get involved, and specifically around the link between racism and false narratives.
I can jump in and share that one of the reasons for Canberra and Prosperity Now entering into this work, really one of the central reasons, is that we recognize that the racialized myths are so ingrained in a lot of the harmful economic narratives as well. And so I expect that in much of our work, we will be tackling both at the same time. Prosperity Now, as many of you know, has been so deep for such a long time in trying to reduce the racial wealth divide in particular, and better understanding the dynamics that drive that. We also at Canberra Collective rarely undertake any work that doesn't have a strong racial equity drive. And so in the new narratives that we will be looking to define and to implement in our collective campaigns, you will see a strong, I think, element of combating and hopefully eroding some of the racialized misperceptions that we currently see very commonly.
Yes, and I'll add to that. At Prosperity Now, our part of our mission is we are working towards racial and ethnic economic justice. And so racial equity is embedded in every aspect of the work that we do, from centering those people who are historically marginalized in the results and the solutions that we develop, all the way through to lifting up those promising practices, adoption and scale. Everything that we do has racial and economic justice embedded within our work.
And I see a huge keyword in all of the questions, which is grassroots, grassroots, grassroots. So when we talk about this coalition, what are some of the roles? I know we talked about the different channels of impacts, but what are some other opportunities for innovation on the ground, and how can that feed into the overall outcomes for this coalition?
Yeah, we see a large number of really exciting pilot programs that are happening at the community level right now. And so part of the work will be to scale up things that are proven to be working. I also, again, want to give a shout out to some of the work that Ideas 42 and others have been leading on the place-based agenda, and understanding how within the umbrella, the new sort of umbrella narratives that we will try to seed nationally, there will be localized nuances that community-based grassroots organizations are going to be best placed to advance. Certainly, when we talk about grassroots narrative change, it encompasses such a wide range of potential fields of action. And as Mary Frances mentioned, one of our, I think, really interesting and exciting next steps in January next year will be to work with subgroups to identify where there is most expertise and also where there is most potential for impact at the grassroots level, and to drive that definition together of what we want to prioritize. I will also stress that that is one half of what this coalition is intended to be, and it is a critical starting point. We know that change happens locally at the ground level. We also know that there is a severe lack of narrative change at scale, and so we'll be looking to complement the grassroots and community-driven work with also highly scaled mass media and pop culture initiatives, so that just like the opposition that we're trying to combat with this work, we also are bringing a holistic, multi-angled approach, and individuals are hearing new narratives from many different sources in quick succession. We know that that will be one of the keys to really effective narrative change.
Okay, and then we also are hearing a lot about collective impact, right? And so one question that leans towards that is, how are we looking to measure impact, or what ways are we looking to build out to measure impact as it relates to this coalition? And I see you all nodding, so I'll let you all have a go at that before I move into the second part of this question.
I will say that just a couple things I will add is, one is that at Prosperity Now, some of our expertise is in convening people and sharing lessons and identifying what's working and what's not working, and really bringing effective solutions to scale. And so that goes along with the question that Mark just answered, which is, how will we share these, how will we identify what's best and make a decision? And then the second part of that I will answer is around measuring impact. And I think a lot of the goal of this coalition is for co-creation. And so we can come with some ideas for what we will measure and how we will measure that impact. But this really is intended to be thought partnership, and really us working jointly together to identify what are the best ways in which we can work and we can measure our impact, and how we'll know when we're successful.
And I can share that some of the early conversations we've had around a general framework for thinking about impact, which I think will elucidate part of the answer, but it's only a starting framework, is we will likely think about impact in 3 tiers. The first tier is our impact on the field of organizations engaged in narrative change. So we want to make sure that we are building the collective learning infrastructure through centralized funding, through knowledge exchange, through co-creation of campaigns, that collective infrastructure, so that the field itself is able to conduct more effective narrative change campaigns. So that's one sphere of impact. The second sphere of impact is, of course, the specific audiences that we target through some of these co-created campaigns. And there are various measures of attitudinal and behavioral change that we have a lot of expertise in at Canberra Collective, that allows you to measure the impact of a particular campaign on a particularly designated audience. And then the third and final tier of impact is, of course, the macro environment. So tracking more generally how in mass media, how in popular culture, how in policy developments are we seeing new narratives emerge? And there are various ways with artificial intelligence and with also just good old human horsepower that we can track the way things are being referenced and the different language and objectives that folks are using in that endeavor. Just to give one example, some of you may be familiar with the Solutions Journalism Network, which runs or has run at least a very interesting program around enabling journalists to tell the story of poverty and economic exclusion in a more informed and impactful way. And on the back of work like that, you can then track in mass media how things are being discussed and how often certain keywords and objectives and phrases are evolving in the popular discourse. And so that is the third and final tier of impact that we'll be keeping an eye on. And as Rebecca said, within those three tiers, I think it's an opportunity for us to co-define altogether what we're able to do and what we think we most need to track.
Okay, and then I'm going to squeeze in one more question. We had so many come in, but clearly people are really excited. We have a question that jumps straight to the outcomes of this, but will there be a space created to share our learnings and outcomes of the work? So we have someone that's already forward thinking as if they're already a coalition member. But how will we record this, and where will the fruits of our labor live?
We're delighted there's already a coalition member, or to welcome a new coalition member. So that is an output of today's conversation for sure, and part of what the ongoing conversation that we're inviting you to join today. And so we, as both Rebecca and Mark have said, the commitment is this grassroots impact and sharing what is having traction and what is taking hold in communities. And so being part of, raising your hand to be part of this community, we will provide the platform to share and the learnings that are happening in communities and in various spaces with other audiences, so that the entire field, all of our work, benefits from them. So it's really those gaps that exist right now that this coalition will seek to fill. Does that tee up our announcement that it marked January 12th?
I think so. I think so. And so, again, we still have questions coming in. We might discuss how to address those offline. But I'm going to move us along to next steps as we close out today's webinar. But again, thank you to everyone that spoke, provided content. As you see, our entire crowd is really just fired up. I'm excited to see the outcome of this coalition. So I'm going to just move forward so that we can talk about next steps. And just get this work started, right? So thank you all again.
All right. So as we've already given you a sneak peek, everybody who's interested in joining us, if you answered that poll yes, or you answered I'm interested, but I need more information, I am going to ask you to mark your calendar for Thursday, January 12th. We will send out an information and a formal meeting invitation for you. And then during that meeting, that'll be the next time that we convene the group. We will allow for the option. I think I saw a question about how we can identify the channel of impact that we want to work through. And so we will have some breakout discussions by channel of impact. We will likely have some discussions around the type of enabling function that you would like to participate in as well. This will be a meet and greet opportunity for us. There are a lot of us on this call today, and so we will pare down just a little bit, but really get into some smaller group conversations and give us the opportunity to meet and greet those who we will be working closely with and really begin to chart our course. I mentioned earlier that we had established a vision. We need some work. We need to work together to establish a mission for this coalition. And so some of that work will happen or will begin to happen in that January conversation. And then looking forward again, look forward to March. And then we'll have some deeper conversation about and break out in some more conversations by channel of impact, org type or enabling function, and continue charting our course. And then that's an opportunity for us to begin action planning and scheduling so we can determine as a coalition how often we want to meet, what dates work for us. If it's Tuesdays, the second Tuesday of every other month, then we can make that determination together. So please be sure to mark your calendars, just put a hold on it for Thursday, January 12th, and be on the lookout for a meeting invitation coming in the coming weeks. And I cannot wait. I'm always excited to roll up our sleeves and get working.
Okay, and as we come to a close with this webinar, we want to remind you that this is not the end. Please continue to reach out to us, interact with us, share your ideas, keep the questions going even as we go about our day today. Here are a few ways that you can continue to engage us as you also continue to engage this coalition launch. But feel free to visit our advocacy center. It makes it super easy for you to get involved in really important efforts and issues within one click. And also please complete the survey for today. That allows us to know that you like what you saw so that we can continue to bring more of these to you, and let us know your suggestions for future learning events. I know a few came through for the questions box, so we'll keep an eye out on those. And also please consider joining our networks. We have 4 really great networks here at Prosperity Now for you to continue this work along with the coalition launch. But again, we want to thank you all for coming to join. Again, the work is not over. Please look out for follow-ups, continue to interact with us. And thank you again for coming. Thank you to all of the speakers. And we're definitely in for some amazing, impactful work following this webinar. So please complete our follow-up survey on your way out. And yeah, hopefully we'll speak to all of you soon. But have a great day. Goodbye.